Good morning. Good to see everyone this morning. Happy Father's Day to the gentlemen in here that are fathers. And I know, which I guess most of us in here cannot call our fathers because our fathers are already gone. So I know Cody's dad's still around, and God's been working on that relationship for them through that accident. But if you do still have your father in here, take advantage of the situation while you have it, because I think about my dad. Think about my dad a lot, and obviously he's the one that raised me, and I am what I am today. A lot. In a lot of ways because of him. Obviously, we all kind of do our own things, but anyway, but like I said, I think about my dad a lot, and can't go back and say, Dad, thank you for this anymore, thank you for that, and I wish I would have said some things I didn't say whenever he was here, and I think about it a lot. I talked to him the night before he died, and I had no idea that night that was going to be the last time I ever talked to him, Brother Parks. Talked to him the night before he died. I hadn't died yet, I don't think. But talked to him the night before he died, and the next morning I went to work and was standing there at work, and I got a phone call, and he was gone, and it happened that quick. And so anyway, like I said, obviously, hindsight 2020, there's a lot of things I would have said had I known this is going to be the last time I ever talked to him, but I didn't know. So like I said, if you still have your dad around, take advantage of the situation while you got it. If you have your Bible, turn to Matthew chapter number 9. I'm just gonna flip back just to refresh our memory, because we stopped in Matthew chapter number 9 yesterday, but I'm just gonna flip back and refresh our memory where we're at. But in John chapter number 2, verse number 18, then answered the Jews and said unto them, what sign showest thou unto us, seeing thou doest these things? And so if you remember from John chapter number 2, that's when Jesus comes into the temple, and he just flips over the tables, and he throws the people out, throws the animals out. He just throws everything out. And because he said, you don't make my Father's house a house of merchandise. And the Jews, they're upset. They're like, hey, what authority? What do you have? Why did you just do what you just did right there? And they said, what sign? And you're going to see again. You're going to see again later in John chapter number 6. They ask him again, what sign? And it's fascinating to me and interesting that they continued to look for a sign. And Jesus gave them sign after sign after sign after sign after sign. And I said it last week, I'm like, they saw and they knew. And we're going to study that, and we're going to see it. But they saw the signs, but they refused to believe the signs. And then we're going to see. And I thought about when they could believe, they wouldn't believe. And so then when they should have believed, then they couldn't believe, because God hardened their heart. Similar to Pharaoh, they had an opportunity, but he hardened his own heart. And then after a little bit, it wasn't Pharaoh hardened his heart anymore, it was God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And you see that sometimes even in salvation. You see someone, when they had the opportunity to be saved, they rejected God. And then all of a sudden, Brother Croft, you see them, they're under conviction, and they're struggling, and they're fighting, and they're struggling, and they're getting so close, and you see they're so close. And then you come back and you're like, well, maybe next service. And I think sometimes in their heart and mind, even they say maybe next service. And they come back to next service, and it's just done. It's gone. It's off of them, and it may never return again. I know Brother Sam used to talk about people all the time that had an opportunity, they walked away, and they never got that opportunity again. And so here are these religious people, and Jesus, when Jesus heals the blind man, they get upset, and they're like, "Hey, are you calling us blind?" And he said, "If you were blind, you'd have no sin. If you were blind, if you just would acknowledge, if you would just acknowledge the fact that you were blind, but that's not what you say we see. You say I see." And so what we started last week, we just started going through the miracles that Jesus did while he was here. And again, I mean, he didn't work them a long time, Brother Croft. I mean, it wasn't, he only really worked miracles for about 3.5 years. But once he started working them, it was just one after another, after another, after another. And they were there. They were there. They saw them. It's not just that they heard about them. They saw them. They had spies there. They had people there. They had people there questioning him. And like I said last week in this passage in Matthew chapter number 9, just as we were finishing, Jesus would mess with them. He would do things. He would do things that challenged. They were challenging him. They were challenging him. They bring the woman taken in adultery and set him down. Set her down in front of him and said, "Hey, Moses commanded that this woman should be stoned. What sayest thou?" And they were trying to trip him up. Well, Jesus did things purposefully to challenge them as well. Which, again, I said it last week, but, he healed on the Sabbath day. He could have healed any other day of the week and did heal on other days of the week, but he would purposefully heal on the Sabbath day to challenge them. And so here in Matthew chapter 9, we're gonna read again in verse number 1, "And he entered into a ship and it passed over and came into his own city. And behold, they brought to him a man sick of the palsy lying on a bed. And Jesus, seeing their faith, said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer. Thy sins be forgiven thee." Now, Cody, they didn't bring him that's not what they brought him for. They didn't bring him to have his sins forgiven. They brought him to be healed. But Jesus used this opportunity to challenge the scribes here. In verse number 3, it says, "And behold, certain of the scribes said within themselves, This man blasphemeth. And Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, Wherefore think ye evil in your hearts?" Now, again, like I said, I think most of us here are not mind readers. Most of us here are not mind readers. And so, sometimes you think you know what someone's thinking. Sometimes you think you know. I can tell when my mother-in-law is interested because she's still awake whenever I'm teaching. Anyway, but you understand, we're not mind readers. Sometimes we think we know and then we don't know, or sometimes you're like, "Oh yeah, that person's upset." Sometimes it's pretty obvious. But again, these people are thinking in their hearts, "This man blasphemeth." And Jesus said to them, he said, "Wherefore think ye evil in your hearts?" He said, "You never said a word. You never said a word, but I not only do I know what your actions are going to be, I know what your thoughts are." And here are these scribes, and like I said, they didn't say it out loud, Gil. They didn't say it out loud, "This man blasphemeth," but they said it in their hearts. And Jesus said, "I know what you're thinking in your heart, and I'm not that I know. I'm about to prove to you that I know." And so he says in verse number 5, he said, "For whether is it easier to say, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Arise and walk?" And so again, he said this to challenge them. And sometimes, sometimes you have to be hit upside the head with some things. A lot of, I don't want to say a lot of, I'm pretty hard-headed sometimes. I told y'all last week I'm kind of I'm kind of a cynic at things. You do have to kind of prove things to me. I don't just because you say it doesn't mean I'm going to believe it. I mean, Brother Croft back there was talking craziness this morning. I just had to walk off, didn't I, Brother Tyrone? I just had to walk off because Brother Croft was talking craziness, and I don't know what kind of Kool-Aid he's been drinking, but it's not been good for him. That's all I got to say. But anyway, Brother Croft was back there talking this morning. And I'm just like, forget it. I'm just walking off. But you know, sometimes you have to prove it to me. You know, show me some facts, show me some evidence, show me some facts, show me some evidence. And so Jesus is going about trying to show them, and he's shaking them up. He's shaking them up. He's trying to shake them. I mean, some people just simply believed. We're going to read over and over where people just hear about him and they come to Jesus and they're like, hey, you know, I think you can do it. And he's like, okay, if you think I can do it, guess what? I'm going to do it for you. And it was that simple. But yet here are these religious people, then they're like, nope. And they see another miracle and they're like, nope, we got this reason. And even though it's plain as day, it's right in front of their face, they keep finding an excuse to say, no, that's not it. No. But here Jesus does this to the scribes, and he says, son, thy sins be forgiven thee. And they're like, only God can forgive sins. That's the point. That was the point. Because guess what? Only God could take this man sick of the palsy and heal him so that he could walk. And he said, guess what, boys? The same one that can say, rise and walk, is the same one that can say your sins are forgiven. And so in verse number 6, but that ye may know, he said, I did this for a sign for you to see. Scribes, the ones that thought evil in your heart, I did this purposely so that you could see it. But that ye may know that, that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. Then saith he to the sick of the palsy, arise, take up thy bed, and go unto thine house. And he arose and departed to his house. But when the multitude saw it, they marveled, and glorified God, which had given such power unto men. Now we know that also that Jesus' disciples were given power to perform these miracles as well. But here, the multitude saw it, Cody. They saw it, and they marveled. You know, again, they may not have understood. They may not have understood the part about thy sins be forgiven, but I'll tell you what they didn't have any trouble understanding. Here's a man that had to be carried on his bed to get him to Jesus, and after Jesus says, arise, guess what? He didn't have to be carried again. He didn't have to be carried again. He got up and walked, and these are people that are known. You know, we're going to see when Jesus heals the blind man, even though the Pharisees didn't want to believe it, that everyone around, they're like, yeah, it's him, or well, it looks like him, and he's like, oh no, it's me. Oh, it's me. Yes, I'm the same one that you've known that was born blind, and yes, it's still me. I can just now see. And so they may not have understood what was going on between Jesus and the scribes when he said, thy sins be forgiven thee, but they figured out pretty quick that there's something different about this guy. There's something different about Jesus right here, that he's able to tell a man that was born in on a bed, arise and walk, and he arose and walked. And so if you go down to chapter 9, verse number 18, again, I picked chapter 8 and chapter 9 of Matthew just because it's just miracle after miracle after miracle, just one after another in quick fashion here. And so in verse number 18 it says, while he spake these things unto them, behold, there came a certain ruler and worshipped him, saying, my daughter is even now dead. Now think about the faith. Think about the faith of this man right here. He comes to Jesus. He comes to Jesus, and as far as I know, and again, maybe I got the the chronological order wrong, but I don't know that Lazarus has already been raised. But here's Jesus, and he's performing these miracles that the scribes and Pharisees look at and say, oh no, nope. But just common people look and say, you know what? I'll tell you what. Never a man spake like this man. No one, no one's ever done miracles like this man before. And so here he comes to Jesus and he's like, my daughter is even now dead. She's dead. And I don't have any hope. Like, she's gone. The doctors have done everything they can do. The physicians have done everything they can do. I've done everything I can do. I spent all I could to save her, and we did not save her. And she's dead. And Chris, we know a lot of times, even sometimes good people are like, oh no, why are you bothering the master? Why are you bothering him with this? Why are you bothering him with this? But here Jairus is like, look, I've heard about this man, and I've heard about these miracles that he's doing, and if he can cleanse a leper, can he raise the dead? If he can make a blind man see, maybe he can raise the dead. If he can make a lame man walk, maybe he can raise the dead. If he can make a dumb man talk, can he raise the dead? And Jairus said, hey, he said, my daughter's even now dead, but come and lay thy hand upon her, and she shall live. He said, look, he said, I just believe. We talked about that last week, how important it is for you to believe. How important it is for you to put your trust in Christ. And so he said in verse 19, and Jesus arose and followed him. And so did his disciples. And behold, in verse 20, we're going to get a different miracle here. And behold, a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood 12 years came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. For she said within herself, if I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole. So again, here's a woman. We know she had an issue of blood. We know that she spent all. We know that she spent all, and yet she didn't get better. She got worse. And so Brother Frazier always had a funny comment about the Ray Medical Center up there. He said the Ray Medical Center is like that. He said you go up there and you spend all your money up there, and he said you're not better, you're worse. But anyway, so that's a modern day doctor's offices. But anyway, so she comes to Jesus and she's like I don't even have to ask him. Again, Brother Parks, here's this woman, and she has so much faith that she says, even just touching the hem of his garment, I don't even have to ask him. If I can just get close enough just to touch him, I'll be made whole. And so in verse 22 it says, but Jesus turned about, and when he saw her, he said, daughter, be of good comfort, thy faith hath made thee whole. And the woman was made whole from that hour. So here's a woman that had this issue of blood for years. And she walked with this issue of blood, and she said, if I can just touch the hem of his garment. And she touched him. And in different passages it describes it a little bit differently. But Jesus senses that virtue went out of him. And so he turns around and he sees her. And he tells her, he said, be of good comfort. Thy faith, trusting in me, believing in me. And again, like I said, this should build. While I was talking about, we were up there at a meeting this week, and we were in their gymnasium, and they second it as their dining hall facilities. And so we're in the gymnasium, but you could just have a conversation, and so you're just talking, you're just talking. And sometimes, even our dining hall's this way. If there's a bunch of people in there, it gets so hard to hear. Like when everyone's sitting around tables having a conversation, it gets so hard to hear. And so we were sitting in there, and I noticed that they had the panels up in the ceiling, and they had the panels on the wall. And I told Brother Randy, I said, I would have loved to have had a decibel reading. I would have loved to have had like a reading like before and then after they put these panels in. And so one of the men in the church came over and sat down beside me, and I asked him about it. And he said, when we first built this building, he said, you could not even hear. He said, you could not even hear, like when someone was praying over the food, he said, you couldn't even get people to hear that it was time to pray for the food because it was so loud in there. And what happens is when you get a crowd in there, everyone's talking, and it starts getting louder and louder and louder, and then the person that's talking can't hear, so they start talking louder. And then the next person beside them is now the noise is getting louder, and so it just keeps building and building and building and building, and it just becomes a roar. And so it just builds. And so every time Jesus did a miracle, someone else said, oh, wait a second. If he can do that for them, he can do that for me. And that's how it should be. And that's how it should have been. And so it just kept building, Chris. It kept building and building and building and building until this man, until Jairus, who, we're going to get back to, until he says, hey, I mean, if you can do all these other things, can you raise the dead to life too? And so in verse number 23, it says, when Jesus came into the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making a noise, he said unto them, give place, for the maid is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. They laughed him to scorn. Now, we've all been laughed at. We've all been laughed at, again, I mean, you do something, I mean, it's just natural for someone to laugh. With my wife, she actually laughs whenever when someone's in pain. It's just her natural reaction that she just laughs, Brother Parks. She's very compassionate. She'll try to help you, but she's probably going to be laughing while she's trying to help you. It's just her natural reaction. And she really laughs if she's the one that inflicted the pain on the person, which is usually me. But anyway, I mean, but understand, I mean, there's a difference between laughed at, like someone does something at work and they laugh at it. But there's a difference in that. I mean, laugh to scorn. There's a big difference. They laughed and laughed and laughed, and they pointed at him, and they're like, "Can you believe what this man said?" And you got to think. I mean, here's Jairus, and he's thinking, "Oh no, please don't, please don't." I mean, y'all are in here, and my daughter's dead. My daughter's dead. You're in here making your little music and trying to comfort us. And I brought this man, and he's my only hope. And we're about to have to bury my daughter, and y'all are going to offend him. I mean, if you're laughed to scorn, if you're laughed to scorn, if someone asks you to do something, and then the people, you show up, and they're like, "This guy? This is the guy that's going to do it." And a lot of us would be like, "Well, fine then, fine. If you don't need me, then I don't need to be here. If you don't want me here, then I don't want to be here." That's our reaction, Gil. Our reaction's like, "Well, fine, whatever. I got other places to do. I got other things to do. I got other places I could be. I came here because he asked me to come here, but if you don't want me here, then I don't want to be here." But that wasn't Jesus' reaction. And he allowed them. And again, sometimes they're never going to get over this, Chris. They're never going to get over the fact that they laughed. Again, sometimes it makes it mean more because of how they reacted. Because how they reacted, once they realized they were wrong, they had a lot of crow to eat, not just a little. Again, sometimes people doubted in their heart. They didn't doubt in their heart. They doubted out loud, and they didn't just doubt out loud. They doubted out loud to the point they laughed him to scorn. You know, I mean, it's one thing to get laughed at, but then it's another thing. Like his facial features would have, his face would have started turning red and everything, because they weren't going to let it go. But when the people were put forth, he went in and took her by the hand, and the maid arose, and the fame hereof went abroad into all the land. And so, Chris, it was that easy for Jesus. It was that easy for Jesus, and I know I'm not reading the correlating passages, but you understand that here they laugh him to scorn, but who had egg on their face at the end? It was those that laughed him to scorn. But Jairus had his daughter healed. Why? Because he just simply believed. He just simply believed that Jesus was different. And so in verse number 27, and when Jesus departed thence, 2 blind men followed him, crying and saying, and it's interesting. I mean, I don't know. Again, like I said, when I read, I try to visualize. But I mean, if you think here's 2 men following him, again, Brother Parks just did it right there. When we go up to Kentucky, there's a church that we go up to in Kentucky that has a blind man, and he's got a stick. He's got a stick that he holds out in front of him. And Chris, he went everywhere with that stick. I mean, like they had well, you've been there, where they poured that pad. That concrete pad, they put a roof over it, but they were playing volleyball in there and stuff. But they didn't, in between the parking lot and where that is, they just got big old rocks. I mean, it's pretty rough to walk on. But after service, it's dark outside, which I guess is dark all the time for a blind man. But anyway, it's dark outside, and we're all out there, and it's like I said, it's not smooth ground, and he's out there just with his stick, just. And he's walking around, and he'll get up against the table, and someone will be like, hey, you can sit down right here or whatever. But after service he gets up and he works his way back into the fellowship hall. And so here's 2 blind men, and they're following Jesus. And I don't know how they figured out. I don't know how they figured out where he was. I don't know, where they heard his voice, but somehow they heard it and they realized it was him, and they started following him, and they're following Jesus. And when he was come into the house, the blind men came to him. And so now Jesus goes into a house, and he's in the house, and the blind men are like, door, like, oh, we're going in, and they just go into this house. They don't know whose house you're a blind man. You don't know whose house you're in. You have no idea whose house you're in. They didn't care, Gil. They said, if we can get to Jesus, again, remember, the Jews in John 2 said, what sign showest thou? He showed them signs. If we can just get to Jesus, Jesus said unto them, believe ye that I am able to do this? They said unto him, yea, Lord. Then touched he their eyes, saying, according to your faith, be it unto you. That's a fascinating statement right there, Cody, because what if they only half believed? What if they, I want to believe, but I'm really not sure? Wouldn't happen. That's right. Maybe they only saw out of one eye instead of 2. Jesus said, according to your faith. According to your faith, Jake. That's what you're going to get. That's what you're going to get. However much you believe in me, if you truly believe that I can restore your sight's restored. But if you're doubting, it's not going to happen. The power was there. Jesus was able to do it. He was willing to do it, but he said, you have to believe. Is salvation not that way? The power's there. The debt has been paid. But if you don't come to Christ and believe, you're not going to get saved. You're not going to be saved. And a lot of people, there's a couple things. Sometimes it's sin, and people are not willing to repent and trust God and come to Him that way. But then there's some people that they just can't get over their doubts, and they just won't believe. And Jesus said, "Hey," He said, "it's according to your faith. Be it unto you." And so then in verse 30 it says, "And their eyes were opened." Their eyes were opened, Chris. They believed. And Jesus straightly charged them, saying, "See that no man know it." Now, it's going to be hard to hide. I mean, again, I love it when Jesus tells people this, because sometimes, and again, maybe this is just me, but I think sometimes Jesus used reverse psychology on people. You know, with your kids, with your kids, and it shouldn't be this way, but your kids are this way sometimes. You're like, "Don't touch that cookie jar." So what do? They're like, "Cookie jar." You know what I mean? And so sometimes you're like, let me just try something right here. You better eat them peas. And they're not going to eat them peas. You're like, "Don't you eat them peas?" And you're like, "Yeah, exactly." And so I think sometimes Jesus used reverse psychology on people, because he said, "See that no man know it." It's going to be impossible. How is two men that have been walking around with a stick, are they going to keep walking around with a stick and pretending like they don't know where they're going? Are they going to keep their stick and walk around with their eyes squinted and be like, walking and stuff? It's impossible for someone who's been blind that's now walking around. Someone's going to be like, "Hey, where's your stick? Where's your stick?" And be like, oh, "I'm sorry, I can't see." Guess what? It's going to be impossible. But Jesus said, "Hey, don't see that no man know it." Guess what? So they couldn't keep it. But when they were departed, spread abroad His fame in all that country. Everywhere they went, Chris, they said, "Can I tell you what happened to me? Can I tell you what happened to me? Can I tell you what happened to me?" Is salvation not that way? Is salvation not that way? When you get saved, you get born again, and you're like, "Hey, can I just tell you what happened to me? Can I just tell you what happened to me? I don't know what else to tell you, but just what happened to me." I mean, is that not the greatest witness that you can give, especially to people that know you? "Hey, I was blind, but now I see. Hey, I used to be this, and I'm not this anymore because God changed me. And the reason I'm not this anymore," they're like, "Hey, hey, Paul, what's up with you? What's different about you?" "Oh, well, I got saved. I got saved. I came to Christ, and Christ changed me, and I'm not the same person I was anymore. I don't do the things I used to do anymore. I don't say the things I used to say anymore. I don't go to the places I used to go anymore. I don't hang with the same crowd that I used to. Not because I feel like I'm better than them, but because God saved me and changed me." These two blind men spread throughout the whole country. The whole country, everywhere they went. Instead of being blind and begging, I mean, how are you going to earn a living as a blind man? You can't earn a living, Chris. You can't earn a living as a blind man. A lot of other handicaps you could do something to earn a living, but you can't. I mean, maybe if they could sing a song. Maybe someone handed them an instrument and they could sing a song. Maybe they could earn a little money that way. But how else a blind man gonna earn a living? He can't see to hammer a nail. He's sure not gonna be in construction. He's not gonna work on them CNC machines like you work on. I mean, you're not. What's a blind man gonna do? But now here's someone that's probably begged their whole adult life. And now instead of begging, they're like, "Hey, I'd like to work for you." "What? You're blind?" "Oh, no, I'm not blind anymore. I can see. Look, stick's gone. I can see." "Well, what happened?" "Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you about this. Me and my buddy, my buddy that worked with me, we both, or that's been with me, we've both been blind, and we're just kind of buddies because, what else are we going to do? We're two blind men sitting around having a conversation. And we hear about this man named Jesus, and we heard about some of these miracles that he did, and the scribes said he's a bad man, and the Pharisees said he's a bad man, and the priest said he was a bad man, but we're like, hey, can a man do these miracles and be a bad man? Can a man do these miracles and be a sinner? Can a man do these miracles and be a devil? I don't think so. And so they said, we just followed him one day. We were like, someone said, hey, there's Jesus, and we're like, we got up and we just started following him. And he went into this house, and when he went in the house, we followed him in the house. Whose house? I don't know. I don't know. It was just someone's house. And we went in, and we talked to him, and we said, hey, we'd like to receive our sight. And he said, according to your faith, and we believed, and now we see. And again, you have the Pharisees and the scribes and a lot of the Jews that are like, nah. But here are these men. Received because they believed, in verse number 32. And as they went out, behold, they brought to him a dumb man possessed with a devil. And when the devil was cast out, the dumb spake, and the multitudes marveled, saying, it was never so seen in Israel. And so, again, they said, it was never so seen. Brother Parks, they said, you explain it. You explain it. You can doubt if you want to, but I'm just telling you, tell me what other answer can you come up with except God? According to John chapter number 3, whenever Nicodemus comes to him, he says, we know that no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. Again, he was close. Nicodemus was close at this point, and I told you all that I think he didn't just get close. I think he got all the way. But you understand that even the Pharisees at that time said, "We know, we know. We've had this discussion. We know." But here he is, and look in verse 34. But the Pharisees said, "He casteth out devils through the prince of devils." That's so sad to me, Brother Parks. When I read that, I'm like, really? Like, did y'all really? And again, I'm gonna take this back to salvation. But did y'all really were you really so afraid to lose what you all had? And they were. Were you really so afraid to lose what you had that you weren't willing to just embrace it and say, wow, it was never so seen in Israel? I can't argue with the man. I can't argue with the man that cast out a devil and a dumb man spoke. I can't argue with a man that spoke the word and two blind men could now see. I can't argue with the man that took a man who was sick of the palsy and said, rise, and he walked. I can't argue with a man a woman that we know had an issue of blood for all these years and spent everything that she had, and all she did was touch the hem of his garment, and she was healed. I can't argue with a man that we know Jairus' daughter was dead. We know she was dead. We know she was dead. Again, it's not hard to figure out if someone's dead or not. It's not, it's pretty even back in those days, I think it's pretty simple to figure out, we don't have a pulse. Nope, no breath right there. That person is dead, and that person has been dead for a while. And it shouldn't be hard, Chris, to say, I tell you what, I give up. Nicodemus did. Nicodemus said, you know what? I don't care what my buddies say. I don't care what the Pharisees say. I don't care what arguments they have to say. I don't care. I can do enough research to figure out he's not from Nazareth. He did come from Bethlehem. I can do enough research. They're like, he's a Galilean. There's no prophet to come out of Galilee. I can figure out enough. I can see with my eyes and hear with my ears, hear the testimony of all these people that have been touched by Jesus. But yet these Pharisees said, he casteth out devils through the prince of devils. And Chris, they had something that they said, no, we'd rather have our religion. We'd rather have I'll read it later, maybe next week or the week after, whenever. But we'd rather have the praise of men. We'd rather have the praise of men. We'd rather have our religion, how we have our religion, and we'd rather have what we got now than to have what's going on here. We don't want it. We don't want a part of that. And Chris, salvation is that way. Jesus calls, you see, you know, you may even have the faith. Again, the Bible says the devils believe and tremble. You may believe. You may believe, and it says that about some of these men, that they believed. They believed, and that's the problem. And I mean, there were many times, Brother Jay, that I could have gotten saved. I could have gotten saved. But I had something that I was holding on to that I was not willing to let go. Because I knew in my heart, Chris, I'm like, well, if I get saved, I'm not going to be able to do these things that I wanted to do. And so because of that, I wouldn't get saved. And I'd push it off and push it off and push it off. And I could have died. We were up at Mayfield Creek this week, and Brother Norris was talking about some things that had happened in his life where he looks back now and he could have died before he got saved. And I've got a very striking memory. I tell my kids about it all the time. Whenever we go to Maryland, when you leave Morgantown, West Virginia, and go up towards where I'm from in Maryland, you climb this big old hill. And I had a buddy with me one time, and this was, I would have been 16, obviously, and I got saved in August when I was 16. And so this would have been June, July-ish, because I didn't get my license till the end of May. So we're talking June, July, and we had to go, I was working for my dad, so we had to go do something, and we're coming back, and I'm driving like a 16-year-old with no brains, and just driving up this mountain. I'm flying up this mountain, and I get behind this truck, and I decide to pass on the right, Chris, because again, I'm 16 years old, I got no brains, and I'm just driving like an idiot, and I shoot out around him. When I shoot out around him, I get in the right-hand lane, and right in front of me, there's a camper broke down in the right-hand lane. So now I got a truck here and a camper here, and I do what all 16-year-olds with no brains do. I decide to go sideways between the camper and the truck, and I just barely squeak by. Just by the grace of God, squeak through right there. A truck driver laid on his horn. Obviously, he was going pretty slow because he's climbing a mountain, but I just barely squeaked through. Again, I mean, he could have, I mean, it wouldn't have been a pit maneuver, but I mean, it would have been like a pit maneuver. Hit the corner of that truck, I'd have rolled that truck. I was going so fast, I'd have rolled that truck 10 times going up that hill. And I think about that often, and every one of my kids can tell that story because like I said, I mean, every time I drive to Maryland, I start up that mountain, I think I could have died right here. And I would have rejected God. I would have rejected Christ. And woke up in hell. And all those things, all those dreams, all those things that I wanted to do. A lot of the people I went to school with never made it out of high school. I say a lot. My sister's class, I'm assuming she's watching and my mom's watching, but my sister's class, like Levi, I bet there was 10 to 12 of those people in her, and I didn't go to a big high school, but in her grade, 10 to 12 of them died of like car wrecks and stuff before they ever made it out of high school, and a bunch of them died more than that died right after they got out of high school. You don't have a promise. We don't have a promise of tomorrow. We don't have that promise. And again, like I said, I mean, here are these Pharisees, and they said, he casted out devils. Really? But what they had, they wanted to hold on to. And in salvation, if you come to the point of salvation and what you have you want to hold on to, guess what? Jesus said you can keep it. That rich young ruler, Jesus told him, he said, you got one thing. You got one thing you lack. Jesus didn't coax a prayer out of him. He didn't get him down. He didn't read him 800 scriptures. He just told him. He said, you got one sin you're holding on to. You deal with that sin, come back, you can have eternal life. But until you deal with that sin, don't waste your time praying. And these Pharisees, they said, we'll hold on to our sin. And a lot of people will sit in a church, and God will call them to salvation, and they'll say, I got these things. I got this thing, this one thing. And once I do that, once I sow these wild oats, and I get these wild oats on, then I'll come back and I'll get saved. And you don't have that promise. Thank y'all.